Our next speaker is Professor Florian Stammler, who is a professor of Arctic anthropology at the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland in Rovaniemi. Florian holds Finland's only professorship of Arctic anthropology and coordinates the anthropology team at the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland. He has published widely on Arctic local and indigenous adaptations to changing social and natural environments, focusing on human-animal relations, Arctic industrializations, and oral history. His monograph, Reindeer Herders Meet the Market, that was published in 2005, is the last ethnography of the Yamal reindeer herding before the big gas extractions came to the region. Florian will be speaking on living with another Arctic amplification, local adaptation, and the future of Arctic cultural diversity at the end of the land. Welcome, Florian.
Thank you, Kiki. Thank you to Alexei for the invitation to speak here at the Arctic Frontiers. It's an honor, and I just checked. It's actually the first Arctic Frontiers I attended was exactly 10 years ago, so it's a decade anniversary as well. And I wanted to share with you, because the topic of our session here is the global and the local as well, some of the implications of this global local considerations when we look at particular communities that, according to our view, live very remotely. Oh yes, okay, good. And I wanted to call this another kind of Arctic amplification. But first I would like to give you some background on the picture that you see there. This was in 2013, shortly after Gazprom's biggest onshore gas deposit opened on the Yamal Peninsula, the Bovenenkovo месторождение. And in the background you see a Gazprom truck on that road, and you slightly see that the road actually makes a turn. The road was supposed to go straight through the site where my friend Yevgeny sits there with the shrub twig. That's a sacred site that the Nenets herders have used for many years for stopping there before they cross a significant river on their migration route, which is right next to the gas deposit. And it's a success story I want to share with you here because they actually managed to convince the gas company to build the road around that sacred site. So that's one of the few sites that they actually managed to preserve. There are not that many of these success stories, but they are there, and that's very nice. And I had the honor to be with them, worshipping the spirits before we crossed the river. And what happened there was that this gas truck then stopped, and the driver was wondering what we were doing there. And Yevgeny invited him over and said, "Well, you know, maybe you have noticed that the road makes a turn, and this place is the reason why the road makes a turn. Why don't you join in? Because we thank the spirits that we have managed to preserve it, that we are still continuing to cross this river on our nomadic migrations through the gas deposit." And the driver, he was from Ukraine. He was thrilled, and he went to his truck and got cigarettes and candies and all that, and contributed these feeding the spirits with us together. And I thought that was a really impressive story on how this coexistence between the global and the local actually works out in this particular area. But why amplification? What I want to talk about here is take that region of Yamal as an example to establish that we should be looking at a much broader range of Arctic amplifications than usually we think about when we hear the term from natural science. I guess maybe many of you know what the Arctic amplification traditionally means. Means more this phenomenon where this net radiation balance due to greenhouse gas levels and so on tends to produce a larger impact on the poles than in more temperate regions, right? But this kind of Arctic amplification that I want to talk about here you can see on the slide. And it becomes so evident, almost extremely like a natural lab on the Yamal Peninsula. So you have climate warming and you have melting ice, and that has actually helped a lot to make the access for the industry easier, and especially the transportation along the Northern Sea Route easier. So that has contributed actually to making industry profitable in this part of the world. That also means, and that amplifies obviously, that as a result you have increased transportation. And you see that in the spiral, I've written that down there. And of course, transportation and extraction of oil and gas means, again, contribution to warming. So you have more warming and, I guess, less ice. So you get the spiral. As a result, in this region, what you can see really well is how you have all these extreme climate events, climate-related weather events that have become, that are not unknown in the region, but they have become much more frequent. These are methane explosions, ice on snow events when huge patches of reindeer pastures freeze over due to sudden temperature changes between plus and minus, a melting permafrost, and then extremely warm summers where the active layer of the permafrost melts so deeply that these ancient spores that bury diseases, for example, like anthrax, they wake up again. And maybe some of you followed that in the news. There was an anthrax outbreak in 2016 on the Yamal Peninsula that created a big international attention. And obviously disasters like that, like methane explosions and anthrax, threatens the incoming industry people as well as the local reindeer herders alike. So all of these impacts are combined and they amplify each other. And that's I think one of the takeaways that I want to bring over in this talk. So what is this region? It's actually in Nenets language, Yamal translates as end of the land. And it's that peninsula that you see on the left side of the map. And this picture that I pasted in there, it's from when I migrated through the gas deposit with the reindeer herders in 2013. And you can see actually how they're nomadic camps. You see these teepee-shaped tents. They are called chums. They almost drown in this industrial landscape with the excavators and all the stuff. So it is pretty challenging actually to migrate on reindeer through a deposit like that. On the left side, you see how these reindeer herders still move as of today. The longest migration route amounts up to 1,200 kilometers a year. So this is serious nomadic pastoralism that we see here. But due to the industrialization, this, what is called in Nenets language, end of the land, has become incredibly central. And you see that on the other pictures, this big world map actually illustrates the world's longest gas pipelines. And you can see the one that connects Yamal to Europe, I think it's one of the world's longest, maybe it is the longest. So we have a direct connection to that area. Actually in Finland, most if not all of our gas comes from Yamal. And then you can also see on the map below that the Yamal Peninsula on the Northern Sea Route, it's located pretty centrally. And I think this may also have played a role for the Chinese decision to invest into the LNG terminal there in Sabetha. So we have a more than 20% participation of the Chinese state-controlled companies in the LNG production in East Yamal, from where it is shipped along the Northern Sea Route. And I think all of this has contributed to the increased attention. When I first got there, like 25 years ago, hardly anybody knew that place in the West. And now it's a lot in the news. And here I pasted some quotes. Also because of these climate-related and weather-related disasters that have received quite some media coverage. But what makes this sort of almost as a natural lap is that you still have this full-time nomadism, and it's not decreasing. It's quite on the contrary. It's increasing. There's a growing number. Like if you look at the demography over the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, you see an increase in full-time nomadic reindeer herders, which is why their ecologists also speak of an overgrazing problem. And that's another amplification, because there's huge debates accusing the herders that they have too many reindeer and that they need to reduce their reindeer head counts on the pastures because it leads to land degradation and so on. But then the herder said, well, we lost all this land to the industry, so what shall we do? Is it our fault, really? So these factors are really, really combined. And here you see some pictures of that combination. I've tried to illustrate this with arrows. On the right side, you see this big crater. That's a picture from the Washington Post. But actually, the first picture was taken by a friend of mine, a reindeer herder from the area, who was out on the land and saw that. And you find many reindeer herders, many nomads who did see methane explosions as a result of which these kind of craters formed. The anthrax outbreak in 2016 was actually also, in terms of narratives, in terms of oral history, a significant event on the tundra of Yamal, because it was the first time since World War II, since the Nenets rebelled against the Soviet Union, that this peninsula saw Russian soldiers again. The Russian army came with the biological response forces to eliminate the anthrax spores from that particular area. You see a picture there on the left side. And that, of course, woke up a lot of memories of how that was in the 1930s and 40s when the Soviet army was shooting the Nenets who rebelled against the Soviet Union. And that operation, killing all the animals and burning all the nomadic households that were in the area, went anything but smooth. That's what you don't really see in the media, but it was for some a traumatic experience for the reindeer herders on the peninsula that were affected by that lost their entire cultural heritage, and they were asking, like, why on earth do we need to burn? Did they need to burn, our entire heritage, like the belts that we inherited from our great grandmothers that have metal locks and these things, but they were very rigorous in this, and the information policy wasn't all too transparent, because it was all done very hastily, and the government wanted to show how fast they can respond to that. Now, we rewind a little bit back, like 20 years ago. How did the place look like? The balance was almost the opposite of what it is today. 20 years ago, when I first came to this place where today is the LNG terminal in Sabetha, it was basically the reindeer herders who were feeding the gas industry and not the other way around. Because it was the collapse of the Soviet geological expedition had happened not long ago, and everything was in the process of restructuring during Yeltsin's time. And Sabetha hosted only a handful of guardians who were guarding the remaining infrastructure, which you can see here on the pictures. And the reindeer herders, they were herding their animals and they were doing well, and they had enough food and everything, whereas the supplies for the industry people was often interrupted. So the reindeer herders literally fed the industry people with meat, and they didn't always get something in exchange. And those of you who work with Arctic communities know that sharing in generalized reciprocity is a very prominent way of helping each other out, and that's what they did with the gas industry too. And when I was living for around a month in this camp where you see the two tents close to these first gas installations, And I saw how a helicopter came in, and I found out later that it was a delegation from the Emir of Qatar, who were thinking if they want to buy up that site and invest in it. And then it turned out that it wasn't the Emir of Qatar. It turned out then later, much later, to be the French and the Chinese who invested in the place. Here you can see the comparison, and the bottom pictures is how it looked like in 1999. I participated in the reindeer slaughter for the Gas people in 99-2000, which you see is the right picture there, right in that village of Sabeta, where today is the terminal. 2018, you see the picture on the top with President Putin opening it. So now the power balance is sort of turned upside down, and I think what is significant here is the argument I want to make with all these ethnographic detail is that when we study change in the Arctic and this connection between the global and the local, we also really need to be aware of what was the starting point for that change for the locals. Because it's not only because preserving history is a value in itself. It's also for understanding people's behavior. The kind of decisions that locals, for example, take today, they are based on their historical memories, very much so. This is how we humans work. If you look into your own biographies, maybe you can find examples for that too. We judge things based on what we already know. And these things, like the last 3 decades, these reindeer herders know what happened there, and that's how they judge their changes that come upon them now with the big industrialization and the changing climate and the natural disasters. And the same is true for the industry. Now, with the industry, the difference is between the industry and the herders that the personnel of the industry changed entirely. There's nobody at that site, for example, of Sabeta anymore who worked in the 1990s there. But among the reindeer herders, there is continuity, and they do make their decisions based on what they know from the past. And therefore, I think it's worth remembering these things. And those of us who are engaged in long-term research, like Tracy, we have heard from her, and myself and others, I think we have also a moral responsibility to share that knowledge that we have of the past decades. And in my last slide, I'm going to come to that, why this responsibility is so important. But what the situation we have today is actually that, and actually the regional government in Yamal is very proud that there is today what they call a successful coexistence of the nomadic reindeer herding with the oil and gas industry. Nowadays you can find in Lidl, in Norway there is no Lidl, isn't there? Okay, but in many other countries of Europe there is Lidl. You can find that meat sold. They invested actually some of their Gazprom-generated tax income into getting European Union certification for their meat, and they installed state-of-the-art slaughterhouses, 15 slaughterhouses all over the place, slaughter meat according to EU regulations and sell that meat in the European Union, which means that reindeer herders, compared to other Russian areas, get a better price for their meat, so they get an income. And they get an income from the hands of their work. And not only as receivers of welfare benefits, sort of victimizing them as sort of the vulnerable, poor indigenous people that became victims of the industry. And that is really significant for the self-confidence of the people. There you can also see that they engage directly with the gas workers in selling fish. And all of that happens amidst all these gas installations. So yes, there are these facts that you can flag as a success. But this last slide I want to dedicate to all these friends that have helped me to carry out that research, and every single person there with whom I have lived there on that slide, they're not there anymore. Most of them, many of them committed suicide, some of them passed away. The one on the right side, the one that laughs, he was killed probably by a gas worker in March 2019, actually on my birthday. And his name is Jarkolana Charoteta. I want to dedicate that to him. And he was living actually where today these gas installations are. The father of the person on the first slide, Zhenya, Yevgeny, he committed suicide after what was called a consultation, when the American company Amoco wanted to develop the Gabon and Togo gas deposits, and when they were told what Amoco was planning there. And the father of Yevgeny couldn't stand it and committed suicide. These are some of the vulnerabilities. And that's why this question is, will they master the spiral of amplification, or will these people become victims? And I'm saying that not because these people are in desperate need of our help because they are so poor. They are autonomous and they are incredibly adaptive to these changes. But when we mess up their environment, we have a responsibility to create space for them to be self-confident. And that's what I want to give you as a message, and thank you for your attention.